Hello everybody, my name is Tim, and today we're going to be talking about 3 things that I learned how to do better when I was building this remote space station ambience video. Those 3 things right off the bat are how useful baked lighting can be, as opposed to using dynamic global illumination like Lumen, using the motion design tools to place things like asteroids around the scene in kind of a procedural way, where I don't have to manually place things around the scene. And then the difference between lighting something to look correct versus looking good. So we'll get into those things all in more depth in just a second, but just want to show you really quick, very briefly, what this scene looks like. So jumping in here to Unreal, this is looking at my sequencer view. This is through the camera. Basically, the camera just flies around. The idea was this is a remote space station out in like the far reaches of space. Like nobody visits here unless they're going on an exploration mission or something. And so it was going to be just some kind of ambient computer beeping sounds and like the hum of ventilation systems. So basically there's like a few little satellites around. There's one spaceship sitting on this landing pad, and then a small kind of space station where somebody might just hang out and wait for further orders or to do some research. So that's really all it does. And it loops back here, and then the animation loops pretty much seamlessly when I put it together in DaVinci Resolve. So that's what the scene is. It should be fairly simple. Nothing's really moving or anything except for the camera. But I want to show you some examples of the issues I ran into, especially with global illumination versus baked lighting. So for that, we're going to hop into DaVinci Resolve here. So right here, I did a variety of tests. These are just 4 of them that I brought in here for this example. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. The first thing was the very worst test. It was my first one. And I'm going to make this full screen real quick. So when I play this, I want you to look for, first of all, this is a different design that I had set up than the final setup. I realized this maybe didn't look realistic because this is more like there would be gravity here and somebody might stand on these platforms and walk around, which I realized doesn't really make sense if you're out in space. So I changed it to more of just like pods and stuff. But anyway, looking in here at all of the different places where global illumination would happen, there's going to be insane flickering and just like instability. Looking in here where all these point lights are and emissive sources on the meshes, just really, really nasty. Some things look fine over here, like on these satellites, but in here is just super bad. And I tried all kinds of denoising things. I tried switching screen traces on and off and, different quality levels, and it just never fixed anything. So the next thing that I tried was, first of all, redesigning the scene and then going back in. And I tried rendering it again with some different settings, but still using Lumen global illumination. And you can see this looks even worse. There's kind of flickering and stuff happening all over, but also crazy instability. Also, there's errors just in the meshes and the materials. But you'll see lights like global illumination and stuff, especially look right here in this blue light that's being cast. Watch it like go away and then pop back, and like main light sources come in and go out like right in there. It just happened. Plus all the flickering that happened in here. And I've had this happen in other videos that I've made, but there's always been a fairly simple solution to it, just kind of changing something in the Lumen settings. But no matter what I tried, it didn't fix it here. So I did some research, and I still don't know very much, but I knew enough to get this project done. I went in and baked the lighting using the GPU Lightmass. And this is, let me make this full screen again. This is how it looked. So first of all, a little bit of information about, this is kind of jumping ahead to the looking correct versus looking good. I was imagining this scene takes place in deep, deep space away from any galaxies or any stars that are close. So in my mind, nothing was casting direct lighting onto it. And it's just this very dim ambient lighting from the stars and then point lights on the meshes. So this is how I had it. And you'll see, this is with the baked lighting, that there's no flickering. There's a little bit of artifacting. These are from like reflections. Okay, Lumen was still being used for reflections, so there's like a little bit of jitteriness in here. But all of that Lumen flickering from the GI is gone. But looking at the vibe in general, to me, I don't know, this wasn't really doing it for me. It didn't seem to have any real depth or dimension to it. And so I was trying to figure out what it was. And when I looked at references, the importance of references again, no matter where a spaceship or a space station was, even if it was supposed to be out in the farthest places of space, all the artwork and all the imagery had basically a strong directional light source hitting whatever it was. And I realized that it didn't look bad and it looked really good, even if it didn't necessarily make sense. And so I went ahead and I redid it with a small, right up here, if you can see that. This is a sun. So I'm using ultra dynamic sky, by the way, and having it simulate real stars using the space mode. And I think it turned out really nice, the background. But I used the sun and made it really, really small, so it kind of blended in. But I used that as a directional light source. And all of a sudden, I get this really nice dimension to the platform and the ship, and you get to see the texture in the metal. And I feel like it still feels like it's out in the middle of space somewhere. But now, to me at least, this is interesting, and this looks much better. So that's just one thing. We did jump ahead to looking good versus looking correct. I feel like this doesn't necessarily look correct, but I think it looks much better. So that's about it for that. Also, one other little weird bonus tip. When I was working with these meshes, I got these in a pack. Actually, it's kind of a kit bash of several different packs. But there's these like canister things down below here. And one thing that I ran into was as the camera moves around, you'll see these things pop. Like it seems like the mesh actually changes as the camera moves here. So watch, watch, watch. Right there. Everything just changed. And I kept going in and out and doing research and trying to figure out why would it be popping like that. And it was only on these things. And I realized going into the material that there's decals. All these emissives down here are decals. And I went into the material and changed it from a deferred decal to just a surface with emissives. And that got rid of the problem. So there was probably a really good reason for those to be decals. But for this scene, changing it from a decal to a surface that was emissive fixed that problem. So if you ever run into that, that may be something that can work for you. All right, let's hop into Unreal Engine real quick. So I'm going to show you very briefly how this baked lighting thing works. That was a very long intro. I apologize for that. Here's how it works. So I have, let me use my little filters here. I have a bunch of point lights, rectangle lights. Actually, I don't have any spotlights anymore. I did before. But I have all these point lights here, okay? And they're all basically on the spaceship, okay? Like there's all these emissive spots, so I wanted those to be casting light. And if I turn off these point lights, you'll see that there's still the light being casted from that. There's probably people who were watching this who are like, yeah, of course, that's how baked lighting works. I didn't know that. If I select this point light and I go in here, and since this is baked, if I move this around, you notice that nothing, it's not casting light anywhere else because it's been baked to right in that spot. Let me undo that. So the benefit of this is it doesn't have to do dynamic global illumination. When you set up the scene, kind of by default, it wants to use Lumen. And the way that you disable Lumen and allow it to do the baked lighting is by following these steps. And it's possible I'll forget something when I'm listing off these steps, but to the best of my memory, this is how it works. And if you ever get confused, there's good documentation on the Unreal Engine documentation for how to bake lighting. So basically what you have to do is go to all of the light sources that you have, and you're going to, let me take that away, change it to static or stationary, okay? I just changed all of them to static to make sure that they would work with this. So all of these point lights and rectangle lights are set to static, okay? The rectangle lights, by the way, these are meshes right here, these things. And then I just put rectangle lights in front of them to actually cast light onto the ship and onto the front of this thing here a little bit. But anyway, you set those to static. Go to plugins, search for GPU, and you're gonna look for GPU Lightmass. Click that on. I don't remember if you have to restart the editor, but if you do, go ahead and do that. And then you go to your project settings, go down to rendering. Dynamic global illumination method, change it from Lumen to none, okay? Because you want Lumen to not be involved with this at all. And then you need to go down to allow static lighting, turn that on. Next thing you need to do is go to your normal map view. Go to your post-process volume. I actually have all my post-process settings set in the camera. So the post-process volume is really only when I'm outside the camera. So for me to make these changes right now isn't going to change anything in the viewport. But what you would do is make sure this thing is set. Oops, I didn't select it yet. There we go. Infinite extend, unbound is checked. And then you're going to change the global illumination method from Lumen to none. Make sure it's set to that there. Again, I'm doing this in my camera actor. So those post-process settings are in here as well. And I made sure that that was set to none. When you do that, you'll notice a change in your viewport. Okay. It'll look suddenly different than it did before. At this point, go down to world settings. I've already put in here in the search bar force, because you're looking for force no pre-computed lighting. By default, it'll want to be checked to true. You need to uncheck that. If this is checked to true, it will skip baking and it won't do it. It won't bake your lighting. So make sure that's unchecked. And then you will go to build. And this wouldn't have been here before, but since you went into the plugins and you enabled it, now it'll be here, GPU Lightmass. That's what we're going to use to bake. So I put it over here just to make it easier and have it nice and neat with this stuff. You go in here, you can adjust the samples and, different multipliers and things. I pretty much stuck with the default settings. One thing that I changed was to uncheck the real-time viewport. If you leave this checked, it's going to be much, much slower, and it says that in the documentation as well. You're going to uncheck that. Of course, I have this thing in here. There we go. Turn off real-time override. So now, with real-time viewport turned off, you will hit build lighting. It'll go through a process. For me, because I have so much in here and some pretty dense meshes, it took a little while. But when it's all done, all of this lighting will be baked. And what that means is that I can go in here, and again, I can turn off all these lights, and all my lighting is going to stay there. And when I export, there's not going to be any flickering because there is no dynamic global illumination. It's all just set there. The downside of that, and this is where my knowledge isn't very full. If this was like a level that you were playing, or you had a bunch of stuff like a character running through, this global illumination is baked and it's not going to react necessarily to the person running through. I believe if you have the light set to stationary, then it can still cast some dynamic elements, some maybe lighting or shadows or something like that. I don't remember. I haven't done it. But for this kind of scene where nothing is moving except for the camera, this fixed my problem. One other point, by the way, is, and again, I don't know how all this works, but I do know that if you go to world settings, you turn on force no pre-computed lighting and then hit build and build lighting. Right there. Sorry, build lighting only. That will basically reset. It'll take away the global illumination that you've baked. Okay. So if you for some reason want to like undo it, get rid of it, that's how you do it. If you don't mess with any of that, then this baked lighting should just stay there. All right, the last thing I want to talk about just briefly is how I used the motion design tools to place asteroids around the scene in kind of a procedural way that was easy to adjust. So let me hop out of here, change some settings here, turn off game settings, make this -10 so we can see it a little bit better. All right, so now I'm just in the normal, viewport view. Again, by the way, if you didn't know this, if you are holding on your right mouse button to like travel around and you use your scroll wheel, that changes the speed of the camera. You don't have to go up here and click it. You can just hold that down, scroll your wheel, change it faster. All right, scattered in the scene are all these asteroids. Okay, they're all over the place. Some of them you see, some of them you don't. The way that I placed these was actually really simple. If you look over here, you'll see I have a cloner. Oops, let's take off the point light one. There we go, got a cloner. And there's a bunch of objects. If I find this in the scene, I have a bunch of different kinds of asteroids as children of it, and that's how the cloner works. And this cloner is scattering these things all over the place. And I'll show you really quick how this works. If I go up, first of all, if you haven't used this before, go to Plugins, search for Motion Design, and make sure Motion Design here is enabled. If it is enabled, then you go to your different modes, go to Motion Design mode, and now you get this little window with some different options. We need to go down to Actors, select Cloner Actor. I'm just going to move to a different spot for a second. You click on Cloner Actor, and then you click on the scene. You see this like grid here. Wherever you click, it'll place that cloner actor. And by default, it will place this thing, the cloner, with a cube, just like a basic cube, as its child. It's right here in the outliner. This thing is what it is cloning. And anything that is a child of this, it will clone. We're just going to use this as an example because it's nice and visual and it won't get confused with anything else. So if I go back to the details here, for the cloner, when you put it in the scene, it will put it directly facing the camera. So it's almost never going to be level or aligned with anything in the world. So if you just go to the cloner and go to your rotation parameters and just zero those out, now the whole cloner is squared away with the world. And you have lots of different layout modes. You can see them right here. I just used grid because we're going to kind of mix it all up with an effector. I also had a bunch of different asteroids, so I think I did like maybe 10 or 20. We'll do 10 here. 10 by 10 by 3, that's fine. Actually, let's do like 5. Okay. And now, let me back up here. We're going to adjust the spacing, and you see how as I drag that, this thing gets further apart or closer together in that dimension. So this right here, depending on how I wanted the scene to look, like I could make this kind of work, but it obviously looks very artificial and just cloned. So what we're going to do is make an effector, and you can use this handy dandy button here to create a linked effector, or you can go up here and add an effector actor and then go in here manually and tell it to look for the effector. It's just easier to do this most of the time. So we're going to use our little filters to make sure we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to name this toot effector, and I'm going to call this toot cloner, just so I know which one is which. And if I go into the toot effector, it has a sphere of influence right now. You have a lot of different things. You can make it unbound. That's really simple, and you can see what's being affected because now they turned red. But by default, it is a sphere, and you can kind of change the fall off of how it's affecting things. So you see this, maybe it's, I don't know if you can see it, this kind of blue sphere here, that is the effector. And if I change the outer radius, you see this gets bigger, and it starts to envelop things. Let me back up a little bit. So I made this a really big number, so it's basically enveloping everything. But basically from the inner radius point to the outer radius is like a strength slider, okay? So you can make it like affect everything all at once by making these kind of the same, or you can make it kind of be a gradient, and you have an easing control here you can select. I'm just going to change it to unbound so that everything in the whole world is going to be affected by it. Now, if I go into offset rotation, and scale, I don't want to affect scale actually, but if I do offset, and you see I slide this around, it's changing things. Oh, I forgot one thing we need to do. Instead of just offset, we're going to change this to a noise pattern, is how it's going to be influencing things. So I change it to noise, and now I change these parameters based on like a Perlin noise type of thing. It is affecting the position of these things in the X, the Y, and the Z directions, okay? And then rotation as well, same kind of thing. They are getting affected. Lots of different directions here. So now these are all basically randomized in space. And that's pretty much just what I did. And then I can still go back into the cloner, change the spacing, and it's just kind of refreshing here. We can change some of these things. And so I can go back into the effector. I can change how much it's going to do things like this. And so you see how it's like there's a bunch of debris flying around in space, and you want to make sure it's not intersecting with other things. But that's how I place the asteroids around. And you can also do forces by going in here. There's a whole bunch of different forces. There's vortex and orientation and whatever. So you see if I go into these now, they are now slightly spinning. And you can adjust how far they're going to spin. You can adjust kind of the rate, so you can slow them down, or you can speed them up if you really want them to spin fast. And there's a ton more stuff you can do with the motion design tools, but I didn't need anything moving, so I didn't. So that's basically how you use that to easily place a bunch of things like asteroids in space like I did. And And that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something about especially baked lighting. I went into this project not knowing anything about it, and it really saved my butt. So if you're working on a scene that's like this, where you could benefit from baked lighting instead of having to have dynamic global illumination, and who knows, by the time you watch this, maybe in the future, maybe they've already figured all of it out. But for right now, in 2025, it was still an issue for me. So hopefully this helped you out.